Hi, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. I've wanted to do this video for absolutely ages. It's about confirmation bias, really. Planes. We've been told for so long that block planes are low angle planes and normal jack planes are not as good at cutting end grain and so on because they're not low angle, that I think we're missing something pretty important. Let me explain why. So what's all this about then? Well, low angle, standard angle, question mark. What I'm going to show you is that's not what's going on. And the way of describing it is just wrong. We need to actually analyze the angles, think about what's going on, and perhaps come up with a couple of experiments, which I think might be very interesting. So here we go. So I've got my old record number 4, and we've got a Stanley 16.5A, which I've had since I was at college. On the face of it, this one has a blade at about 20 odd degrees. This one has a blade at about 40 odd degrees. Right, I think it's roughly 22 or something as far as I remember. And this is, I think, 45 as far as I remember. People call these low angle. They call these standard, so to speak, standard angle. And that is used as the explanation of why these work better on end grain and difficult timbers, you know, any sort of difficult situation. You tend to reach for the block plane, anything fairly straightforward, you know, and especially large areas and so on. Obviously you go for a larger plane, standard smoothing plane generally. But that's not what's going on. Okay, here we go. Let's take the blades out and have a look. So this blade here, sitting in the plane at about 20 degrees, 22 degrees, something like that, has the bevel on the top. This one, sitting in the plane at about 45 degrees, has the bevel on the underside, on this side. So the honing angle on this blade is 30 degrees. So what the front of the blade is actually doing is 22, or whatever the bed angle is on that, I can't tell you exactly, plus 30. That's 43 degrees. This one, which is at 45 degrees, has the bevel on the back, and so the front of the blade is at 45 degrees. So there's not a difference of blade angle between of that versus that. It's kind of that versus that. Big question mark should appear above my head. It certainly is in my head. So something else is going on, and I think I know what it is, and I've come up with an experiment which hopefully will test that theory and will explain it. So my thinking, here we go. On this one, the reason we reach for a little block plane is because this blade, even though it's got the same angle of cut roughly, the actual cutting edge is supported by this blade being directly, is it sort of more directly behind it. And so it's less likely to judder, it's less likely to bend and flex. This one, which has the same cutting angle on the front, is not supported so much there. It's actually also because of the length of the grinding angle, you've got this tip which is away from contact from any part of the frog at the back. And so there's a tendency for it to vibrate, I think, squeal, judder when it hits something hard like end grain. And I think that's actually, although people don't say it, that's the main purpose of what is often described as this chip breaker. It's not a chip breaker. I think it's there to actually put the blade under tension so that it's kind of pre-stressing that blade down so that it's less likely to flap about. And I think that's why we are told to move the cap iron towards the cutting edge when we're dealing with wilder grain, when we're dealing with end grain and so on. Anything hard, you tend to move the cap iron closer to the to the cutting edge, and that has to be the reason for it. So I've come up with some experiments which are hopefully going to prove this. So let's talk about the block plane first of all, shall we? These little block planes, I just absolutely love them. Basically, I've kind of you tend to reach for the block plane to do so many jobs. The 60.5A, especially for me, it fits in the hand beautifully. It's an absolute delight. Just so happens I've got another one. Woohoo! So what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare them both, sharpen them both as per standard, and test them side by side so we can be happy that both of them are working as well as, one as the other. And then I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to alter it so that it will accept the blade the other way up. That is to say, it will accept the blade with the bevel cut on the bottom. Now, obviously, with a blade, let's use that. With a blade like that, let's say the blade that angle, which it will be, that's about the angle, and then with the bottom of the plane there, the actual the sharpening angle is going to be pretty steep, but that's what I'm going to do anyway. So it will give a really low angle blade, and if my theory is right, it should do what a block plane does, but even better. So that's going to be the first one. The second one, do you know what? I'm going to be a bit of a chicken. I'm not going to use my beloved number 4 with its rosewood handles and everything. No. I'm going to use a pair of number 4 planes that I've got as well. It's almost like I'm a tool obsessive, isn't it? Sorry. The first one is a Stanley Bailey number 4. The second one is an English one called a Sedgley. It's just basically another straight copy of the Stanley ones. And the way we're going to do this, on one of them, well, first of all, much like the block planes, I'm going to sharpen both so they're exactly the same. Test them both to show that one is not better than the other. Then I am going to take one of them. I haven't decided which one, to be honest. Let's say, for the sake of argument, this one. Whoop, that's adjusted a bit tight. And so there it is at the moment, 45 degrees with the 30-degree honing angle on the front. And I am going to do a honing and grinding angle all in one of maybe about 43 degrees. So my thinking is, instead of it just being a fine point of a blade which is pushing against the timber, it will actually be something quite beefy. So it would make it more awkward to keep sharp. It would mean more grinding each time, but that's not really the purpose of this experiment. Isn't really to say this is how we should do it. It's just to demonstrate that at present most block planes aren't low angle, and they are pretty much the same angle as a smoothing plane. And should we wish to do so, there is a way of making a smoothing plane work as well on end grain as the current block plane, and the current block plane can be improved. So that's what I'm doing. Do you know what? I need to stop and have a drink of water before I carry on. Well, that took masses of sharpening. I mean, what I didn't say is I actually bought this one second hand specifically to do this experiment, because I couldn't bring myself to actually sort of hack my much beloved time served 60.5A about. So, I mean, the only adjustment I'm going to have to do is to shorten this adjustable plate here. So, I mean, it's not that serious, but hey. But what I was going to say is this one took masses of sharpening because the the honing angle was already much steeper than it should be. So this one probably has had a cutting angle not of about 43, but probably approaching 50 degrees, and still was working beautifully. So that in itself is really quite interesting. Okay, I've chosen a bit of mahogany for this test because I had some lying around, and because this has got some pretty interlocked grain. So I'm going to do a test with the grain and then a test on end grain. I think that's the fairest direction to test them in. So this is my old favourite. Yeah, working nicely. This is the new Pretender. I think I've got it set a tad finer. There we go. Yeah, also working nicely. Yeah, similar. End grain. My one. The new one. Yeah, about the same, although I have to say I do actually prefer my old one. And again, this time with the two number 4s, both now sharpened. I'll use the same. Shall I use? Yeah, I'll use the same piece of mahogany. Why not? I'll do what I would normally do, which is just put a little tiny bit of wax on the base. Bailey cutting nicely, perhaps a little bit coarse. Lovely. Oh, feels quite different. Actually, that's really strange. Why is that then? Even sounds different. Perhaps I got it a bit finer than this. So similar. Actually, I have to say, the old Sedgwick is lovely to use for whatever reason. So there we go. Right, and end grain. I'm not expecting either one of these to do very well here. So, I mean, obviously I'm cutting it off the end, so I mean there will always be some breakage on the end here, but not to worry. So first of all, the Stanley. I mean, you have to really press down. If you take it easy, you can get it to cut, you know, reasonably well. But it's a long way from being good. And for whatever reason, this little Sedgwick number 4, I keep calling it Sedgwick, it's not, it's Sedgley. This little Sedgley number 4 is absolutely lovely. Yeah. And cuts end grain quite well. I'm going to try cutting more quickly and perhaps with a coarser cut on both of them, because it would be an embarrassing fail if everything cuts end grain really well already. I have to say, both of the number 4s are performing spectacularly well on end grain at the moment, which I suppose, in a funny kind of way, you'd expect them to if everything that I've been saying up to this point is correct. But I was hoping one of them would judder, or both would judder or squeal a little bit. Perhaps I need to find a bit of something a bit harder wood-wise. What have I got? A bit of oak, maybe? Right, looking deep in the wood pile, an old wooden door. So I'm actually going to adjust the camera. There we go. I think I'll have a go at this with the number 4s and also the block planes. It's a pretty manky bit of old wood on the ends, certainly. Okay. So both of the number 16.5As very able to cope with it. Stanley number 4. Oh God. Right, okay. Suddenly it's not happy with that. Try setting it a bit finer. Yeah, that's more like the experience you'd expect with a smoothing plane on tough end grain, isn't it? And the Sedgley. I don't know what to make of this. The Sedgley performs better, significantly better than the Stanley. So I think what I will do is I will carry out my theory on the Stanley one to see if I can improve that. And I would say, well, I'm kind of committed to modifying the one that I bought specifically for the purpose on the block plane. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Honestly, I was going to spare you the pain of actually going through all the process of sharpening this blade and everything, but I wanted to show you the full horror of having to, in the end, to actually get this to a sensible flat bevel at such a fine angle. I've had to sort of create this little jig with the blade held on a sort of a slope, and running the file on the diamond file on the sort of platform to try and get a nice flat bevel coming to a fine point. But it's an absolute pig to do and totally impractical. This is something I will not be doing again in the future. Even if this blade works incredibly well, this planing works incredibly well, in terms of practicalities, wow, it's going to have to be amazing to make it worth it's like a 4 or 5 fold level of difficulty in maintaining it compared with the normal one. So here it is. Here's the full stupidity of this thing. So obviously flat on what would be the top of the blade, and something less than 22, I suppose about 20, 21 on that face. What a pig to sharpen. because you can't just burnish the, you know, can't just polish the edge that way, because that will lift it off the surface. So please be sharp. It's all right. It's not brilliant, but that does nicely illustrate what I was talking about. If that's the bottom of the plane, the face of the blade is now like whatever it is, 21, 22, whereas this one, I got my maths wrong earlier on, didn't I? Of course, because that one, I mean, if it's actually got a 30-degree hone right on the front, then it's going to be coming in at over 50 degrees. So in fact, this low angle plane has got a steeper face striking the wood than the good old-fashioned smoothing plane. So like I say, it has to be something other than the actual angle on the front of the blade that is critical. Anyway, we're getting there. And I promise we will be testing both of these setups at the end of this video. So one thing I always forget to do is say like and subscribe. Please subscribe to this channel. Lots of violin content, but also lots of oddball tool stuff. Okay, so thank you. Okay, I've done the number 4 iron, and this was much easier to do, but it's kind of goes almost against everything I know about sharpening. And I mean, look at the steepness of that. I don't know if you can see that. It's really steep, but of course it sits in the blade, in the plane, at an angle like that. So now the whole point of this is now it's a thick, sturdy blade that hopefully won't chatter as much. That's my thinking. We'll see what happens. Okay, first the 2 number 4s, which I've got set up. So sighting down the plane, they look like they've got a very similar amount of blade showing. Okay, with the grain, I'm not going to tell you which is which. Nice. Equally nice. End grain. Nice. Other one. Oh, wow. I can't tell them apart. The first one I used was the standard one on the normal with the grain. The second one was the steeper angle version. And then I reversed them when I was doing the end grain. And then I went back to the normal one just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding how it felt. And I can't tell them apart, which is really strange. So what do I deduce from that? Well, the theory's okay, it still works okay. So which is easier to sharpen? Probably the standard approach is easier to sharpen. There is something that happens when people sharpen blades for planes by hand, and they can get some silly steep angles on the honing, and it seems to work very well until one day they actually sort of hone it at such a steep angle that the cutting edge of the blade is higher than the actual back of the bevel, and so it skates across the timber. So that's probably why those people are able to use their plane quite satisfactorily until that day when suddenly you go a little bit too far. So for me, either one of those feels, I honestly really couldn't tell them apart, which is really weird. Now for the other one, which I'm a bit more scared about. Okay, so the first one is the standard plane. The second one is going to be my weirdo plane. Yeah, no surprise there. Okay, let's give it a go. Doesn't want to cut. Why is that? Oh. Look at this. That is dreadful. That's truly appalling. Every time you start to cut, it just seems to pick up a load of fibres on the front of the blade. It seems to be actually riving the wood far more than actually cutting it. It's not doing anything really. It's I would say that's a complete and utter failure. So let's try it on end grain, just to prove the stupidity of my idea. That's the standard one. What's going on? It's just... Nah. Even with a decent amount of projection, I just cannot get it to work. Basically, it's a total and utter failure, I think it's fair to say. I think what I'm going to do, rather than give up, is I'm going to take the blade out, and I'm actually going to, on what is the flat, you know, the top of the blade in this instance, I'm actually going to get in there and give it a sort of something like a 5-degree hone, just to thicken up the front edge of the blade, and see if that makes any difference, because at the moment this is a complete and utter failure. Right, done that. Wow. What a load of rubbish. Yeah, so I think I have destroyed a rather nice 60.5A to no avail, really. That's a shame. At least I didn't do it to my old favourite one. Oh, gutted about that. I suppose if I can get hold of another foot, this adjustable foot, and another blade, I can more or less resurrect it. Hey ho. But I would say the number 4 planes were slightly more successful. I think the steeper angle one, the adjusted one, cuts more ably on end grain. It seems, I don't know if it's just me, but if it's my perception of it, but it feels... That's very strange. That's really strange. Yeah, they feel like 2 completely different planes now. Before, I actually thought this Sedgley one was little bit smoother and easier to use than the Stanley one. I would say now, if anything, although the cut doesn't seem markedly better, if anything, I would say the Stanley one feels nicer to use. This is going to seem really weird. If you haven't used a wooden plane, you won't know what on earth I'm talking about. It actually, when you've got a wooden plane set up and working really nicely, there's nothing better than it. It's beautiful. And this actually feels a little bit more like you're using a wooden plane in terms of how the sound of the shaving and how the shaving seems to, you know, the amount of effort that you put in, which is slightly less than standard. I'm intrigued by this one. I think that this was a success. This was a failure. I've just realised that I haven't done the, I haven't tested these on the oak, so I'm going to do that now. Sedgley set up standard. Okay. That's pretty much what you'd expect. It does it. It's not happy. It's not terribly good at it. I think this hard oak is giving a real test to this. So here we go. Okay, it's able to plough through there, no problem at all. Let me just swap back. Can you hear the difference? This sounds like a softer sound. I think what I said just now about it feeling like a wooden plane almost in some weird way is kind of about right. It's hard to put my finger on it. There is a subtle difference. Whether it's significant, I don't know. I'd probably is I'd say the Stanley now with that steeper angle and cut is maybe a slightly easier to use on the end grain than the Sedgley one without. So there we go. I'd like to think in my head, and talk about confirmation bias, I'm kind of desperately seeking ways of using this to sort of confirm that I'm correct in every way. I think in order to be scientific about it, I have to say there's very little evidence. I think that this has improved matters. It's quite clear that if you make a plane with a blade which has got an incredibly fine end on it, the thing deflects and moves so much that it won't even cut into the wood. It just wants to ride above it. So that was a complete failure. Hasn't changed the fact that I absolutely love block planes. This is turning into a really long end to the video. In all honesty, they all three, not this one, all three work really well. There we are. I think we just better wind it up. We'll call it inconclusive. And I think I'm just going to assume that the reason I like using a block plane so much is it's just fits in the hand beautifully, and it's as basic as that. Okay. Cheers, folks. Look after yourself. See you soon. Bye.